The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, forwarded from my attorney's office with a yellow routing slip clipped to the corner. Inside was a single-page authorization form from Meridian Capital Partners, the firm I had helped build 22 years ago, requesting my signature to approve a pension distribution for a senior partner named Marcus Holloway. The name meant nothing to me until I saw the beneficiary designation section where a spouse's name appeared in small print, Jennifer Holloway, formerly Jennifer Carsten-Wade, my ex-wife. I set the document on my kitchen counter and filled the kettle. The water took 3 minutes to boil. I poured it over loose tea leaves and watched them unfold in the glass pot, dark tendrils bleeding into clarity. The form remained where I had left it, its corporate letterhead precise and impersonal. I had not heard Jennifer's voice in 11 months. I had not seen her face in 13. And now her financial future required my participation. The irony was not lost on me. Neither was the opportunity. I lived alone in a rented duplex 6 blocks from the college where I taught 2 finance courses per semester. The rooms were spare but sufficient. A desk by the window, a narrow bed, bookshelves built from lumber I had cut and sanded myself. I rose at 5 most mornings, made coffee, and read until the sky turned gray. I cooked simple meals and ate them, standing at the counter. My daughter called every Sunday evening, her voice careful and loving, threading the space between loyalty and guilt. She was the only person from my former life who still spoke to me without calculation. The divorce had been efficient. Jennifer's attorney had submitted a petition citing irreconcilable differences, and my attorney had advised against contesting. The marriage had been 23 years old. Our daughter, Emma, had just finished her sophomore year at Dartmouth. The house went to Jennifer, along with most of the liquid assets. I kept a modest brokerage account in the old truck I had driven since Emma was in elementary school. Jennifer had also insisted I forfeit my remaining equity stake in Meridian, the private equity firm I had co-founded with 2 partners in 1999. At the time of the divorce, my stake was worth approximately $4 million on paper. Jennifer's attorney argued that my departure from the firm's day-to-day operations 3 years earlier constituted abandonment of my fiduciary role and that the equity should be redistributed to active partners. My attorney called this argument creative. The judge called it persuasive. I signed the documents because fighting would have cost Emma 2 more years of depositions, and I had already watched her lose 12 pounds that spring from stress. What Jennifer and her attorney had not mentioned, because they likely did not know, was that the original partnership agreement contained a residual approval clause. Any distribution over $500,000 required written consent from all 3 founding partners. It was an old safeguard, drafted in the firm's second year when we were still operating out of a repurposed insurance office with peeling wallpaper and a single shared assistant. The clause had survived every subsequent amendment and revision, a relic embedded in the foundation documents that no one had bothered to remove because no one had ever needed to invoke it. I was no longer an equity partner, but I was still a founding partner. And Marcus Holloway's pension buyout was worth $970,000. I drank my tea slowly. The leaves settled at the bottom of the cup, a dark sediment that held no answers. I rinsed the cup and set it in the drying rack, then picked up the envelope and read the form again. The signature line was blank. The deadline was 30 days from the date of receipt. Jennifer had always been meticulous about timelines. We had met in graduate school, both of us enrolled in the same econometric seminar. She sat 3 rows ahead of me, her posture immaculate, her notes color-coded. After the 4th lecture, I asked if I could borrow her notes to compare against mine. She said yes, but only if I returned them before the next class. I did, along with a photocopy I had made at the library and a short list of corrections I had found in the professor's derivation of the Heckman selection model. She looked at the list, then at me, and said I was either very smart or very arrogant. I told her I was probably both. She smiled, and the smile was not warm, but it was real. We married 18 months later. I was 26. She was 25. We worked in tandem for the next 10 years, building careers that complemented each other with mechanical precision. She took a position at a regulatory consultancy. I joined a venture capital fund, then left to start Meridian with two colleagues who shared my impatience with institutional inertia. Jennifer managed our household finances with the same rigor she applied to compliance frameworks. We had Emma 2 years into the firm's existence. Jennifer returned to work after 6 weeks. I took Emma to the office in a carrier and set her on my desk while I reviewed term sheets. The marriage was never romantic. It was functional. We respected each other's competence and rarely argued because we rarely disagreed on matters that required decisions. We attended the right dinners, joined the right boards, sent Emma to the right schools. When Meridian's portfolio began returning 22% annually, we bought the house in Laurelhurst with the view of the water and the kitchen that Jennifer redesigned with Italian marble and custom cabinetry. Then Emma went to college, and the house became very quiet. I'd always known that Jennifer measured value in terms of output. When I stepped back from Meridian's daily operations to focus on mentoring younger partners and teaching, I saw the shift in Tiete. Her eyes. I was no longer producing, I was reflecting. She found this unacceptable. She began staying late at her consultancy, attending conferences that ran through weekends, returning home with a brittleness that I could not soften. I did not ask her if there was someone else because I suspected the answer, and I was not prepared to force a crisis that Emma would inherit. The crisis came anyway. Jennifer filed 9 days after Emma's spring semester ended. Emma called me from her apartment in Hanover, her voice fracturing around the edges, asking why I had not told her things were bad. I said I had not wanted to burden her. She said that was the problem. I had always tried to carry everything quietly, and now there was nothing left to carry. Jennifer remarried 4 months after the divorce was finalized. I learned this from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it carefully over coffee, watching my face for a reaction I did not give. The new husband was younger, successful, someone Jennifer had met through professional circles. I did not ask for details. I deleted the few remaining contacts we had shared and focused on the courses I was teaching and the small consulting projects that kept my skills sharp. Now, Marcus Holloway's pension form sat on my counter, and I understood that the younger, successful husband was not an abstraction. He was a senior partner at Meridian. He had been there for 6 years, joining, just as I began my transition to a reduced role. I'd likely met him at a holiday party or a partner retreat, shaken his hand, exchanged forgettable pleasantries. He had been sleeping with my wife while I signed off on his quarterly bonuses. I opened my laptop and accessed Meridian's internal directory, which I still had login credentials for, due to an administrative oversight that no one had corrected. Marcus Holloway's profile appeared, Stanford MBA, 12 years at Goldman before joining Meridian, specialization in distressed asset acquisitions. His photo showed a man in his early 40s with clean features and the confident posture of someone who had never been told no. His bio mentioned a passion for competitive sailing and a seat on the board of a local children's hospital. I closed the laptop and made a second cup of tea. The approval form did not require an immediate response. It required a calculated one. I had 30 days to decide whether to sign, and in those 30 days, I could gather information that would clarify whether my signature was a formality or a lever. I called my former assistant, Grace, who had stayed at Meridian after my departure and now worked in the operations group. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and startled. "Mr. Wade, I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know. I'm sorry to intrude. I have a question about a pension distribution form." There was a pause. "Are you back on the advisory board?" "No, I received a form as a founding partner. It requires my approval for a distribution over the threshold." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh, that's the Holloway buyout. Is there something unusual about it?" Grace lowered her voice. "It's not unusual, but the timing is tight. He's trying to close before the end of the fiscal year for tax reasons. There's some pressure from his side." "From him personally?" "From his attorney, and from Jennifer." I absorbed this. She's involved. She's been calling the operations line every few days to check on the status. We told her it's pending your approval, and she said that shouldn't be a problem because you're not an active partner anymore. "But the clause is still enforceable." "Correct. Legal reviewed it last week. They confirmed you have full discretion." I thanked Grace and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk and wrote out a timeline. The divorce had finalized in late November of the previous year. Jennifer remarried in March. Marcus was now seeking to retire in December, which meant he and Jennifer had likely planned this transition months ago. The pension buyout was not just a financial transaction. It was the foundation of their next chapter. Travel, perhaps. A home somewhere warm, freedom from the grind that had consumed both their careers, and it required my cooperation. I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. This was not about revenge. It was about establishing terms. Over the next 2 weeks, I made 4 additional calls. The first was to an attorney I had worked with on a pro bono housing case, someone unconnected to my divorce and trustworthy in ways that mattered. I explained the situation without embellishment. He listened, asked 3 clarifying questions, and then said I was within my rights to withhold approval for any reason or for no reason at all, provided I did not act in bad faith. I asked what constituted bad faith. He said demanding a bribe or creating conditions that were impossible to meet. Short of that, my discretion was absolute. The second call was to the senior partner who had taken over my role at Meridian, a man named Donald Practices, who I had mentored in his early years. Donald was careful on the phone, but he confirmed that Marcus's buyout was a priority for the firm because it cleared a seat for a younger partner who was being courted by a competitor. If the buyout fell through, the firm risked losing both Marcus and the incoming talent. I asked if anyone had considered that I might not sign. Donald hesitated. We assumed it was pro forma. You're not involved in operations anymore. But the clause is still active. Yes, and Marcus's attorney is aware. They're preparing a backup plan in case you decline. What kind of backup plan? Restructuring the distribution to stay under the threshold. It would take 3 years instead of 1, and the tax implications would be worse. Jennifer is not happy about that option. I thanked Donald and ended the call. The third call was to Emma. I did not tell her about the form, but I asked how she was and whether she had spoken to her mother recently. Emma said she had, and that Jennifer seemed stressed about something work-related. I asked if Jennifer had mentioned Marcus. Emma's voice shifted, became more cautious. She talks about him sometimes. He's nice to her. That's all I know. Do you like him? I don't really know him. He's polite when I visit. He asks about school. And you're okay with how things are? Emma was quiet for a long time. I'm okay with you being okay, Dad. That's what matters to me. I told her I loved her and ended the call before my voice could betray anything. The fourth call was to a forensic accountant I had hired years ago for a Meridian portfolio audit. I asked him to review Meridian's publicly available filings and tell me if anything about the firm's financial position stood out. He called back 3 days later and said the firm had taken on significant leverage in the past 18 months to fund a real estate acquisition that had not yet generated returns. The partners were likely under pressure to reduce cash outflows, which explained why Marcus's buyout was being expedited. If I delayed or declined, it would create a bottleneck that would ripple through the firm's cash management and possibly impact the incoming partner's offer. I sat with this information for 2 more days, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. Jennifer had wanted the divorce to be clean and quick, with no residual entanglements. She had fought to sever my equity and my presence from the firm, and she had succeeded. But she had not anticipated this clause, and she had not imagined that I might still hold a card. On the 19th day, I drafted a response. It was a single page, typed on plain paper with no letterhead. I addressed it to Meridian's legal department and copied Marcus's attorney. The language was courteous and precise. I acknowledged receipt of the pension distribution request. I noted that the approval clause was still enforceable under the original partnership agreement. I explained that I was willing to provide the necessary authorization, but that I required certain assurances in writing before doing so. The assurances were simple. First, I wanted confirmation that my departure from Meridian had been voluntary, and that no statements had been made, internally or externally, suggesting incompetence or misconduct on my part. Second, I wanted a formal acknowledgement from Jennifer that the equity forfeiture had been a negotiated settlement, not a punitive measure. Third, I wanted both items documented in letters signed by Jennifer and by Meridian's current managing partners, with copies provided to Emma. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for an apology. I asked for the truth to be stated clearly and preserved. I sent the letter by certified mail and waited. The first response came from Marcus's attorney, a terse email stating that my conditions were unusual and that they needed time to consult with their clients. The second response came 3 days later from Jennifer herself. She called my cell phone at 9 in the evening. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "This is unnecessary," she said, no greeting. "It's entirely necessary. You're holding up a retirement plan out of spite. I'm holding it up because I want the record corrected." Her voice tightened. "There's nothing to correct. You stepped back from the firm because you lost interest. You agreed to the equity terms because you didn't want to fight. And I'm agreeing to sign this form if you put that in writing. You're being petty. I'm being precise. If everything was fair and voluntary, then documenting it should be simple." There was silence on the line. I heard her breathing, measured and controlled. "What do you gain from this?" she asked finally. "Clarity, and a record that Emma can read when she's older and wondering what happened." Emma doesn't need to read legal documents. She needs to move on. She needs to know I didn't just disappear because I was useless. You said that, Jennifer. You told Emma I had stopped contributing, that I was coasting, that the divorce was necessary because I wasn't the man you married. I said those things because they were true. Then write them down. Have Meridian's partners confirm that I left voluntarily and competently. If you're telling the truth, it should take you less than an hour. Another silence. Then she said, "And if I do this, you'll sign?" "Yes." "No other conditions?" "None." She hung up without saying goodbye. I waited another week. The deadline was now 8 days away. On the 6th day, I received a package from Meridian's legal department containing 2 letters. The first was signed by Jennifer and notarized. It stated that the equity forfeiture had been a mutually agreed settlement term, not a punitive action, and that my departure from Meridian had been voluntary. The second letter was signed by Donald and the other managing partners. It confirmed that my tenure at Meridian had been marked by professionalism and sound judgment, and that my transition to a teaching role had been supported by the partnership. Both letters included language requesting that I honor my commitment to approve the pension distribution. I read the letters twice, then made copies and placed the originals in a fireproof box I kept in my closet. Then I signed the approval form, scanned it, and sent it to Meridian's legal department with a brief note thanking them for their cooperation. Marcus Holloway's pension buyout was processed 4 days later. Jennifer did not call to thank me. Emma called the following Sunday and asked in a careful voice if I had heard from her mother recently. I said I had, and that we had resolved a small administrative matter. Emma asked if everything was okay. I told her it was. 2 months later, I received an invitation to Meridian's annual holiday reception. It was addressed to me by name, not as a courtesy. Copy, and included a handwritten note from Donald saying that the partners hoped I would attend. I had not been to the office in nearly 2 years. I went. The reception was held in the main conference room on the 14th floor, the same room where we had signed the original partnership documents in 1999. The space had been remodeled since then, the walls now covered in reclaimed wood and the furniture sleek and expensive. I arrived at 7, and the room was already crowded with partners and clients and staff. Grace saw me first and came over with a glass of wine, her face bright. "You came," she said. "I was invited. People are glad you're here. Donald's been telling everyone you're the reason the firm got off the ground." I thanked her and moved through the room slowly, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Several partners approached me to say they appreciated my work in the early years, that the firm's reputation had been built on the standards I had set. I accepted the comments without false modesty and without lingering. I was there to be seen, not to reclaim anything. Marcus Holloway was standing near the windows, a drink in his hand, talking to a group of younger associates. I watched him for a moment. He looked relaxed, his posture easy, his smile frequent. He had no idea who I was. Jennifer was not with him. I later learned from Grace that she had stayed home, citing a conflict with a board meeting. I left the reception at 8:30 before the toasts and the speeches. I drove home through streets slick with December rain, the city lights blurred and soft. When I reached my duplex, I made tea and sat at my desk, looking out at the dark. The letters were still in the fireproof box. Emma had asked for copies, and I had sent them to her without commentary. She had called the day she received them, her voice thick with something I could not name. She said, "Thank you." I said it was nothing. She said it was everything. Jennifer and Marcus moved to Arizona in February to a gated community outside Scottsdale with a golf course and views of the desert. Emma visited them once during spring break and reported that they seemed happy. She did not ask me how I felt about this. I was grateful for her discretion. I continued teaching. I took on another consulting project, this one for a startup run by a former student who wanted advice on capital structure. I repaired the deck behind my duplex and planted herbs in containers along the railing. I read in the mornings and walked in the evenings, and I spoke to Emma every Sunday. The divorce had taken many things, but it had not taken my ability to set terms. Jennifer had called me useless because I had stopped producing wealth at the pace she required. She had remarried a man who could, and she had assumed that my irrelevance was permanent. But relevance is not measured only in equity and output. It is measured in the ability to say no, to require acknowledgement, to insist that the record reflect the truth. I had not sabotaged Marcus's retirement. I had simply required that the people who had erased me admit in writing that the erasure had been a choice, not a necessity. Emma understood this. Jennifer did not. Marcus never would. I finished my tea and rinsed the cup. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street was silent. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the dark, and felt no need to fill it with anything more.